With Final Fantasy VII Rebirth opening up to incredible reviews, now considered the second highest rated Final Fantasy behind the original Final Fantasy IX, fans have started to ask what might be next after this remake trilogy is over. With Capcom and their Resident Evil remakes, they've become sort of the best sellers for the company, so why shouldn't Square Enix follow suit and remake some of the old classic Final Fantasies everybody loves and wants to experience again in a new, improved way? Many titles in the Final Fantasy franchise could benefit greatly from having a remake. The recent release of the series Pixel remasters have shown that there is interest in experiencing older Final Fantasy titles on modern platforms. So let's go over the options. Honestly, I think there's really only two, for the main discussion, but there is another, two maybes, that I've been kind of thinking about. Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI. So these are my maybes. Let's start with Final Fantasy IV. An attempt at a Final Fantasy IV remake has already been made with the 3D remake for the Nintendo DS in 2007. Along with the Pixel remaster, the port of the PlayStation Portable, and the Game Boy Advance version, there is no shortage of ways to play this game, but I still feel like it's one of the games in the franchise that deserves the Final Fantasy VII remake treatment, which I fear Square Enix struck gold with its hybrid gameplay system of being a nice balance between action and turn-based combat. Now, besides the obvious gameplay improvements, I'm going to go at a little spoiler here with the story. So I'll give a little warning, for each game, but for Final Fantasy IV specifically, I think it has one of the most iconic protagonists in the series. Cecil's story of redemption and his transformation from a dark knight to a paladin was integral to how, archetypes were used for the rest of the Final Fantasy series. However, with a story so focused on one character, there are points where the supporting cast doesn't really get their due in favor, just for supporting, Cecil's journey. Characters like Kain, Rosa, Rydia, remain important, but they just don't have as much agency as Cecil. A reworked story, like what Final Fantasy VII Remake did, could give these characters more time to shine on their own, and seeing the benefits a remake could have on locations like the Tower of Babel, Mount Ordeals, and the Kingdom of Baron would be incredible. And I know some fans don't like what the sequel, the After Years, added, but I feel like remaking both of these games as a duology or something could be something special. Next up on the maybes list is a lot of fans' personal favorite in the Final Fantasy franchise, Final Fantasy VI. While I do not share this sentiment personally, I can understand why it's so beloved in the series. We are almost immediately endeared to the game's protagonist, Terra Brantford, and her journey, as well as the journey of her comrades, is one of pain and loss, as well as the hope and love that can still come out of bleak situations. Alongside the story, Nobuo Uematsu's score cements every moment into this. It's amazing. There's no misses. There's Terra's theme, Kefka's theme, Opera House, it's just amazing. As for the main party characters, this next point can seem as a positive or a negative, depending on how you look at it. Final Fantasy VI has a whopping 14 playable characters, nearly all of them with at least a small segment all to themselves that hones in on who they are, and you can see what their motivations are. From Terra to Locke to Shadow to Cyan, the list goes on forever. See, the problem with such a huge cast of characters is it falls short occasionally in moments where the game lets you choose your own party, and you cannot know who will be speaking when. This would probably be the hardest part of remaking this game, the absolutely ridiculous amount of characters. Even a recent interview with Final Fantasy VII Remake's producer Yoshinori Kitase stated that a potential remake for Final Fantasy VI would be bigger than 7 due to the sheer number of characters in the original game. He goes on to say that he's aware of the internal interest at Square Enix, but is unable to affirmatively respond, which apparently bums him out. So if this game does end up getting remade someday, it'll be a long time from now. Now that we have the maybe remakes out of the way, we gotta talk about the two games I personally see Square tackling next after the 7 remake trilogy. I'm going out of order here because I want to talk about Final Fantasy IX first, because, well, I don't really like Final Fantasy IX. I know, I personally just felt like the game was a step back narratively and visually compared to its two predecessors, Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII. I understand it was very much a love letter to classic Final Fantasy. Characters had specific roles in the party, so party composition was really important. The style was more the classic blend of fantasy and steampunk, rather than the more, pseudo-futuristic look, primarily used in 7 and 8. The new fans brought in by 7, including myself, were kind of put off by the vast change in style depicted in the previous two games. They also went back to more exaggerated body proportions compared to what 8 did, where I thought it was perfected after 7. But 8 and 9 were made concurrently, so it's not like they regressed on purpose after 8, it was just like a stylistic choice. I suppose the biggest contrast is the main character. In comparison to Cloud and Squall, you have an upbeat, charismatic Zidane who doesn't hide his emotions and cares about his friends from the get-go. His lighthearted nature, makes it easy for people to connect with. The supporting cast also fits really nice with his with his dynamic. You got, Vivi, Freya, Steiner. They really offset his offbeat, charge, headfirst, attitude. Garnet is a very likable heroine as well, someone who is flawed but develops her own convictions along the way. The main issue is what I brought up earlier. Final Fantasy IX felt unfamiliar to gamers who played 7 and 8, Final Fantasy IX's setting and story was a departure from what gamers experienced in the two previous games when that's what all they knew, which had a more futuristic setting. The game's story and characters were closer to some of the older Final Fantasy games. The game was also released in the tail end of the PlayStation's lifespan. Final Fantasy IX was released in 2000, which was the same year in which, gamers were already waiting for the launch of the PlayStation 2. This meant that most of the attention went to the newer consoles and their games. If this is the game to first get the remake treatment after 7, I hope it draws someone like me in more than the original did back in 2000. And now for the cream of the crop. One of my favorites, if not my favorite Final Fantasy game. I loved Remake, and I'm really looking forward to Rebirth and the final game in the trilogy, so my answer may change by then, but for now, it's still 8. Now, 8 to many fans is considered the black sheep of the franchise. Before diving into the gameplay reasons why, let's go over the story reasons. Final Fantasy VIII doesn't really match up to Final Fantasy VII because the two games have completely different goals in their storytelling. Final Fantasy VII is a darker fantasy dealing with issues of identity and loss, while Final Fantasy VIII has a very different central theme, love. Because of this, Final Fantasy VIII is much more upbeat in a way and focuses more on the character development of the protagonist, Squall, than Final Fantasy VII did. Where Final Fantasy VII focused more on the mystery of certain moments in Cloud's life, Final Fantasy VIII explores Squall's development as a moody loner to a leader who can finally be the man that he was meant to be. A lot of fans don't give Squall enough time to grow as a character. You're supposed to dislike him in the beginning, and then you're supposed to grow on him over time. Now, unlike 7, which is almost all plot point to plot point, with some mystery thrown in, 8 spends a lot of time getting to know the characters around you. And now, the gameplay. Alright, let's get it out of the way first. The Junction system. The biggest coin toss for fans were if they like this game or not, is if they get down with the new system, or if it turned them off forever. Instead of characters learning magic abilities and then expending, innate mana points to use them, the magic abilities themselves were treated as like an inventory, shared by everyone. The player could say have 17 fire spells, 13 Blizzaga spells, 2 flare spells, etc. They obtain more by using a special command to draw those spells out of enemy monsters. Eventually you begin junctioning specific spells to your character's stats, rather than using magic spells. The goal becomes to collect 99 of certain powerful spells, and then junction them to your stats, like attack, magic, and the goal is and it improves your character's power. If you play your cards right, don't worry, we'll get to Triple Triad soon, you can essentially break the game early if you draw enough cards and don't level up from random encounters. See, enemies in this game scale with your level, so if you stay a low level, they stay a low level, and vice versa. So depending on whether you draw a lot, or barely draw at all, or fight, grind a lot, or not at all, you essentially artificially make the game easier or harder on yourself. And now the main reason even fans that hate Final Fantasy VIII will give this part of the game its praise is triple frickin' Triad. This is basically Gwent before Gwent in terms of popularity. Triple Triad is played on a 3x3 grid, with both players having selected or randomly distributed 5 cards as their hand for the game. The goal is to use the values on the card to turn over an opponent's red cards to blue, and end up with more blue cards on the board, until the 3x3 board is completely filled with cards. Each card is 4 numbers, from 1A, with A counting as 10. Each number represents a side of the card, either the top, right, bottom, or left. When a card is played next to cards of the opposing color, their values on the sides of the cards that touch are compared, and whatever is the lower one gets flipped. It's the best minigame in any Final Fantasy, period, and should honestly be its own downloadable game. So I think a proper remake of this game, and maybe even they could even change the Junction system in a way or make it optional. It's something that I think would draw a lot more people in to the world of Final Fantasy VIII that didn't really like it to begin with, just like how I didn't like 9 to begin with. And those, I would say, are the top 4 contenders for what Square Enix should remake next. My personal vote goes to Final Fantasy VIII, but I know there's a lot of die-hard Final Fantasy VI and 9 fans out there, and honestly, those would be fine too. Hopefully, with continued success of Rebirth and the 3rd game in the planned trilogy, Square jumps right back into remaking more of these classics. Thanks for watching, everybody. Be sure to leave a comment on what Final Fantasy you'd personally like to see remade next, and leave a like and subscribe if you can. Catch you next time.